Hello and welcome into Off the Bench here on a lovely Wednesday morning. I'm Reed Mouse. Stone Shields, my producer. We've got a great show for you lined up today, and it's a good day here in the Queen City. A lot of action going on. Obviously, the Bengals are gearing up for a game against their heated rival over there in Pittsburgh against the Steelers, a game that they really desperately need. And there was some big-time basketball here in the Queen City down there at Fifth Third Arena. The Bearcats took down the UD Flyers in a, we'll call it a colorful game. We'll call it it was a tough watch at times, but you know, a win is a win. And if you like, you talked about it was a colorful win here in the Queen City. We also had the Northern Lights randomly, Aurora Borealis here in Southwest. Stone, did you get outside? Did you check out any? Did you check out the Northern Lights?
I did. It was pretty cool. We got some cool pictures there at the house. The green kind of showed up there. I mean, the red, the green. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. You know, that doesn't happen all the time. So hopefully everybody out there got to see it. But I know there was some place like in Trenton. It was really crazy. It wasn't too wild where I was at, but that's pretty cool stuff right there. I'm not a big science guy, but that's cool. That's cool.
Right. I here in Hamilton, I went up to the top of the hill, Eaton Hill, tried to see if I can see it. Couldn't really see it, so I actually went out to the country in between Oxford and Hamilton and could see it very bright, very vibrantly. It was a really, really cool thing. Hopefully you guys got to see it. I think that's going to be out tonight, so if you guys didn't get to see it last night, make sure to go out because that's kind of like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Don't know the science behind it at all. I know it has something to do with the sun's rays and the magnetic forces around the world, but we're not going to bog into that. What we are going to bog into is sports here in the Queen City. We mentioned Paul Fritcher is going to be on at 10:15. We're going to have Jay Morrison on at 10:40. We're going to be talking respectively about college basketball in this area, and then later on in the show about the Cincinnati Bengals as they had some big news early on in this week, and now they gear up to play the Pittsburgh Steelers. So very excited to talk to those. Stone, how was Fifth Third Arena last night? I tried my hardest. I tried my darndest to get you down there, to convince you, and I think I did a great job. How was the vibes in Fifth Third Arena last night?
Yeah, well, as I said, told you yesterday, I wasn't planning on going down there. Ultimately did not go down there. But, look, the UC Bearcats, they won, but that was a tough watch, to be honest with you. That was an ugly basketball game. Dayton, I don't know if they're very good. They couldn't make anything. That kind of saved Cincinnati. But the turnovers, we kind of talked about it with Keegan Nickerson yesterday. We're piling up on this team through the first two games. You're kind of like, okay, hopefully it gets a little bit better here against Dayton. Well, it actually got a lot worse, and I think they were approaching, like, setting a school record. Like, it was that bad. So, they got a lot of work to do. But, I mean, you won the game, I guess, right? So that's a positive. But, yeah, that was ugly. For
it was an interesting thing for someone on the periphery. Watched a good deal of that game. And, you know what? Yeah, it was ugly. It was ugly at times. A lot of turnovers, a lot of missed shots from Dayton. And, you know, that's kind of what you get when you watch college basketball from time to time, especially early on in the year when there needs to be some altering, some fabricating, you know, just some, you know, widgeting with the team, with the rotations, with just getting your shot, getting ready for the season as you progress, as with every sport. We see it here in Cincinnati with the Bengals. The first month, oftentimes, regardless of how good our offensive players are, there seems to be some tinkering that needs to be done. You see this in baseball all the time. You say, a lot of times the pitchers dominate April, and then the bats come out once it warms up. We're seeing this in college basketball, and it was interesting because, you know, they get this big win. And it's something, quite honestly, that Cincinnati, I mean, you could talk about the validity of how big of a win this is, but, you know, UD's a good team. It's a team that has aspirations to make the tournament. You bring them in at home, and it's a game you have to win because you can't lose to UD at home. But you get it done, and kind of the vibe was after the game, you know, you talked to Wes Miller, and he said, hey, we're gonna be negative watching some tape, but you won the game. And at the end of the day, when you're a team that, you know, hasn't made the postseason, hasn't made the NCAA tournament in 6 years, when you haven't made the NCAA tournament in Wes Miller's tenure, you win a game against a good team. You take it however it is. You deal with how you played afterwards, but at the end of it all, a win is a win. We said that the first 2 weeks of the football season this year. A win is a win. You don't look at it. You don't look a gift horse in the mouth. But it was interesting because the guys that I knew, not just Stone that was down there at Fifth Third Arena, but all the guys that I knew that were down there at Fifth Third, they're tweeting about it, they're texting me about it, and they're like, man, it's hard to get excited about this team. It's hard to really see how this team can compete in the Big 12 with the way that they're playing. Luckily, you don't have to worry about that now. They got a big game next Friday against Louisville, who had a big win of their own. Last night again in the Commonwealth, taking down the University of Kentucky, Pat Kelsey. They'll be playing at Heritage Bank. That is a week from this Friday, so that's a big game, another game that I'm going to convince Stone to go down to. Do you think I have a better shot at getting you to go to that one?
Well, you were talking about the bank. I don't know, man. I mean, what did we say? It's kind of a dump down there, right? So I don't know. And I just, based on what you saw from the Cats last night, like, what makes you even think they're going to keep that thing within 20? So, I don't know. A lot of work to do. Look, I'll go to Fifth Third at some point this year. Maybe
like you did last night.
Yes, I was there last night. It was great. But, yeah, I don't know if I'll be going to the Heritage Bank Center. We got some good venues here in Cincinnati, right? FC Stadium's probably the best one. Fifth Third's great. Paycor, not so much. GABP is great, but, I mean, the bank is not. That's not where you want to be.
It is funny because GABP is a great stadium.
Yes.
GABP is a great stadium. Cintas Center, fantastic stadium. Haven't been to TQL. Absolutely gorgeous from the pictures you've seen. Everyone that goes there is gorgeous. We just got two big duds in Paycor Stadium and the Heritage Bank Center. And, yeah, I don't know the last time you guys have been in there, but it's as tough as at points that basketball game is to watch. Every time you walk into Heritage Banquet Center, I've never been there for a concert, but every time you walk in there for whatever venue you go to, a Cyclones game, the Harlem Globetrotters coming down, you're going in there for Raw. Every time you go in there, you are reminded, man, this stadium this arena needs a facelift. But all the same, that's a really outstanding win for UC, even though they did not play well. You beat a team like Dayton by 12, regardless of if it's at home, regardless of if Dayton shoots, they shoot 2 for 26, 33% from the field, 2 for 26 from 3. It shows that, this is what we talk all the time about in baseball, football, all these sports, is that it doesn't matter sometimes how you play if you can still get the win. It doesn't matter what it looks like on the backside as long as you still get the win. For the entire last year, all I was told was how terrible the Kansas City Chiefs are. For all of last season, all I heard, for really the last 3 years, all I heard was how bad the Kansas City Chiefs are. And then they get into the Super Bowl or they win a Super Bowl and you're like, well, that's what good teams do. That's how it comes out. When Michigan won their national championship a few years ago, a lot of times people were talking about this team kind of wins some ugly games. This team doesn't look all that great. But you know what? They just dominated. They just dominated from point A to point B. They didn't put up 70 points a game. They just kind of dominated from the get. And we will get into to college basketball soon enough. As I mentioned, we have Paul Frischner coming on at 10:15, Jay Morrison coming on at 10:40. Another big news that kind of slithered its way, and I know you're talking to Mark Sheldon on your show, is a new focus point of the Reds offseason. Previously, and I'm going to get the numbers probably wrong, so I'm paraphrasing. Don't hold me into this. I believe previously it was reported that they're going to have 20 to 25 million, or they were marketing to have the same payroll as last year, which would leave them this much room. And there's an article that came out that says now, the Reds' budget is going to be 15 to 20 million to spend this offseason, which I don't know if you guys are good at math. The big name that everyone's pulling out is, can the Reds sign Kyle Schwarber? If you only have 15 to 20 million, that's kind of either you're going to overgo that budget and you won't have anything else to spend, or you're going to have to, nickel and dime your way to get to the end. I know, Stone, you're going to be talking to Mark Sheldon. I kind of broke that news to you right before we started the show. As a Reds fan, does that give you any cause for concern going into this offseason, especially after you made the postseason like you did this year?
Maybe a little bit. That's an interesting report because obviously Krall said a few weeks ago that it was going to be about the same. Right. So, I haven't seen the article or whatever. So, maybe we'll talk to Mark about that. But yeah, I think the Kyle Schwarber thing, it seems like a great fit. And I'm definitely looking forward to asking him if there's, a realistic chance this could actually happen, or if this is just, kind of a pipe dream for the Cincinnati Reds. But yeah, it's a small market team. You're never going to go out there and spend like some of these other teams. You're going to have to win in between the margins, right? You're going to have to hit on some guys that lots of other people have passed up on. And, Nick Kroll and Brad Mayer, they're going to have to make some tough calls here this offseason as they address their bullpen, right? That's something that needs to be addressed. Good chance you lose. Pagan, he says he wants to come back, but you could lose him. You could be in the market for a new closer. So you got some questions there in your bullpen. And, looking forward to talking to Mark a little bit later on my show about all things Cincinnati Reds. But, yeah, the report you mentioned, I would say definitely a little bit concerning because you didn't already have a ton of money to work with. Now it's going to be even less than that. So, we'll see about that.
And it feels like on top of that, the NL Central is constantly an evolving landscape where, the Cubs won 93 games yesterday, but they're not bringing back Kyle Tucker this year. They're not going to really vie for him. They don't offer or don't commit to the option for an extension of Shota Imanaga, so you're wondering, what are they going to do with the offense? And then you see reports that the Milwaukee Brewers faction are pitching around the idea of trading away Freddie Peralta, which it's just really interesting. It's a constantly evolving landscape, especially the Cardinals right there. And don't sleep on the Pittsburgh Pirates. You never sleep on the Pittsburgh Pirates. That's what I've always said on this show. So it'll just be interesting to see how this all unfolds. It feels like there is an opportunity similar to the way that the Bengals have an opportunity with a bad AFC North season this year, though their options are dwindling, especially if they don't get a win this Sunday. It feels like the Reds have an opportunity to kind of seat themselves at the top of the division, to kind of assert themselves as, hey, we got some young talent that we're very excited about. Can we supplement it in the right way? Can we get kind of creative? Can we do things and put the best team out there and to really go after and win this NL Central for the first time in 13 years? You'd have to go all the way back to 2012. Also, that was the last time that the Reds had won a postseason game. I actually saw a tweet come out since the most recent era of expansion in Major League Baseball, when the Arizona Diamondbacks and Tampa Bay Devil Rays, now the Tampa Bay Rays, joined Major League Baseball. They split the leagues up. They moved the Milwaukee Brewers out of the American League and over to the National League. When that happened in 1998, they said, how many playoff wins? Not how many playoff series wins. How many wins in the postseason do you have? And out of the 30 teams, including the 2 teams that joined Major League Baseball in 1998, who has the fewest amount of postseason wins? Unfortunately, it's a team right here in town, the Cincinnati Reds. Right above them, Pittsburgh Pirates. And never sleep on the Pittsburgh Pirates. Stone, are we ready to roll?
1 second, Reed.
All right.
1 second.
All right, I'll buy time as long. We're bringing on a host of the Rebound Rundown, Paul Fritchner, who was up in Indianapolis yesterday. He's getting some calls, and it looks like we are ready to welcome on our good friend, former Chatterbox Sports employee, fresh Dougie too. He's got a fresh haircut, looking good as always. Right. Paul Fritchner. Paul, how are you on this lovely Wednesday? How was your trip and calling the game up at Hinkle Fieldhouse yesterday?
It was great. Yesterday, I think Butler looks really good. I was impressed with the Bulldogs. Had some fun. It's just good to be talking hoops again, Reed. It's good to see you.
I know. Last time I booked you to come on our program here on Chatterbox Sports, I actually had to dip out and had to have Stone, which Stone's a better interviewer than me anyway, so you're probably better off that way. But I know you're getting, before we talk about some of the local teams, obviously Paul Fritchner, host of the Rebound Rundown and some other great college basketball products. You're finally getting to call some games on ESPN Plus. You're getting some. You went down to the field of 68, getting some play-by-play opportunities. How has kind of been this experience as you're traveling up to Indianapolis? You're going down to Charlotte. How's this experience been so far?
It's been awesome. I mean, it really has. Not to sound like a goober, right? But to work for so long to be able to get these opportunities, I'm just grateful to finally be on the air doing play-by-play for games like this in the Big East, games that are high-level games. Field of 68 to be doing the first game of the entire season. So I'll have one more on ESPN Plus for Xavier on Black Friday, and then I'll have 3 on CBS Sports Network in, that'll be January. I have a couple games in Charleston. I'll be down at Camel, the Fighting Camels. I'll be down there as well. So, yeah, just bouncing around, covering the sport. And then when I'm not doing play-by-play, I'll be doing more, just kind of like video-based content stuff for the rundown as we go forward. So, yeah, it's good stuff, Reed. I appreciate you asking, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Fighting camels. We hey, here in Hamilton, we love the Fighting Campbell Camels, as their baseball coach used to be from Hamilton. Now he's the head coach up at Ohio State University. So, been following the Camels for a while.
There we go.
Let's talk about.
It always comes back to Hamilton. If there's one thing I know, it always comes back to Hamilton.
All roads lead to the city of sculpture, the city that you spent so much great time shivering in our studio as it got really, really cold.
I miss Gina's. I miss Gina's.
How can I get you to Gina's?
It's not hard. I just got to find the time. But I need to get back. I haven't been to Gina's since my last day there. I need to get. I miss that fettuccine Alfredo desperately.
All right, let's talk about college basketball. My Xavier Musketeers, your alum, the Xavier Musketeers obviously had a tough game. Had a tough game the other night, and really through the first 3 games, their few exhibition games that they had, it's pretty clear that this team isn't as talented as we've seen from years past. It's the first year of Coach Pitino here down there in Norwood at Xavier University. How does the roster get to where it is right now? Based off what we've seen, obviously Sean Miller goes away. How does Xavier get to the point where their roster just at this point doesn't look like it's going to be able to compete in the Big East?
Yeah, there's a lot obviously that went into it, and you mentioned some of it right there, Reed. But I think a big portion of it is, one, the NIL budget at Xavier, we'll call it like it is not top half of the Big East. It's bottom half of the Big East this year. So you're already sort of starting from a point where you need to work up and try to maybe overcoach the talent that you're going to bring in. So from that perspective, it's already going to be difficult. And then at the same time, you bring in a new coach, you're trying to figure out what you have coming back. Well, you don't have a whole lot coming back because at the time, Roddy Anderson and Lassina Traore were the only 2 players that hadn't put their names in the portal yet. Traore ends up going down to Texas. So Roddy Anderson is the only player coming back. You have an entire roster to fill out. And, on the one hand, you can say, yeah, every team has to pay every player, so that's no excuse. But on the other hand, you may at least through retention, I don't want to say take a hometown discount, but effectively that's what it is, take a hometown discount to where, a player may be more encouraged to stay with the coaching staff for a little bit less because they like the coach. They like their development plan. They don't want to go change into a new system. They don't want to be one of these guys that becomes a 4 schools in 4 years guy. I mean, even on top of all of that, if the player cares about graduation, it's hard logistically to graduate at that point. So it was always going to be difficult for Xavier this year, but I think what has been surprising for me is just like you said, it doesn't look like a team right now that's going to be able to compete very well in the Big East. And I think we anticipated that going into the season. But the other night on Monday, Santa Clara, I'm not going to sit here and say that Xavier, hear me out here. Santa Clara it's a top 75 team. They're a very good team. Xavier should have won the game. I mean, we're sitting here splitting hairs over Xavier beating Santa Clara at home. That's kind of tells you where the team is right now. But this is not like DePaul losing last night to Buffalo, who was 304th in the country. Santa Clara is a really, really good team. I'm very surprised Xavier even played. I don't know why Xavier played the game. In this point in time where in a non-conference, if you're going to play a bye game, play the sub 250 team. And they even struggled against those in the first 2 games.
Yeah, no, it's I checked the Santa Clara roster. There was no Steve Nash on the team, so it was surprising to see that score. Nonetheless, a decade ago, obviously when we mentioned it, Pitino's first year, a decade ago when a coach takes over a team, right? Someone leaves, goes somewhere else, and a new coach comes in. There was a chance to retain the players, but there was also kind of a built-in excuse of, oh, these aren't my guys, right? These aren't the guys that I could go out or that I recruited, that I brought into the program. These aren't my guys. In this era of college basketball, that excuse, I'm not saying it's going by the wayside, but there are different avenues of saying, hey, I can the transfer portal, with the NIL era, you can make an aggressive approach and completely turn over a roster year to year. We see this almost at every, the tier 1 teams, the tier 2 teams, the tier 3 teams. They're having great turnover. Is it fair to characterize Xavier's approach to this season with, the transfer portal, with their NIL, as strategic and kind of a long view approach to their team?
Yes, except the problem is right now you're not seeing the guys that have multiple years of eligibility play like they should be on the team going forward. That's the biggest concern to me, because you always knew that this year was going to be a development year, that this year was going to be a year where you hope. I think in college basketball right now, it's fair to say that most teams are operating off of 2-year plans, right? That you have your core coming in for 1 year, and then the second year is the year that you can really compete, because you can figure out who from the core worked, what can you pair with that core out of the transfer portal. The biggest issue you've seen through 3 games right now for Xavier is that I'm not sure any of the guys that are coming back next year, and you can say it's early, but there are things that you can identify in these players that it's tough to see a lot of these guys being able to compete at a high level going forward. And so what does that mean, Reed? It means that next year in the transfer portal, are you going to have to do this all over again? Maybe. Now, it's 3 games in. Richard Pitino and his staff is known for development, so can they develop some of these guys when you get into Big East play? Maybe it was a rocky start. Maybe they're just not acclimating to the system as well as they should be, and you'll see some guys kind of catch heat as the season goes on. But it's really concerning to me watching Xavier trying to figure out which one of these guys, you were hoping it would be Anthony Robinson, but his rebounding rate is the same as Xavier's lowest rebounding rate last year from, I believe it was Davion McKnight and Ryan Conwell had the lowest defensive rebounding rate on the team last year. I mean, they're guards. They're not even trying to be down in the post. And I believe he's sharing the same rate as those 2 guys. So to me, to get back to your question, you're trying to develop for a couple of years. And right now you're hoping that at least maybe a couple of these guys can pan out so that next year you're not talking about a roster of, 8 to 10 guys out of the portal to turn the whole thing over again. Because at that point, you become concerned about fatigue with a lot of factors. It's just not optimal.
You spent a lot of time around Coach Sean Miller over the past few years, obviously the Sean Miller podcast, and you spend some time now with Richard Pitino. You're looking at this year. It was an open secret even when Richard Pitino's dad's going, it's going to be a tough year for Xavier this year. When it's an open secret about what this season is going to be, how as a coach, if you're Richard Pitino, the junior, if you're Coach Pitino for Xavier, how do you devote time into I can't completely forget this season, though he might want to at the end of the year. I can't completely forfeit this season away. I've got to develop these guys. I got to keep going. But also the future is elsewhere. Also the future is, we got to be looking at different areas. How do you deviate that time, especially right here in the season? And I know you're not a head coach, but that's a tough line to kind of tiptoe across.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. And I would say the biggest thing is trying to make sure that donors, the people that have the money, the people that are supporting the program through an NIL lens, that they are understanding the vision and what's going to come down the line. Because if the big donors are frustrated with the vision or don't see it or don't understand it or don't want to support it, then you're going to have a hard time financially backing the plan going forward. So that's where you have an issue right now is, can you make sure that the people that need to support this program over the next couple of seasons to give Richard Pitino the resources that he needs to win at Xavier? It's been rumored that Xavier had about $6 million in NIL this year, which I think $6 million this year is definitely on the low end, but it's not nothing. It's not the lowest in the Big East. I think, coming from New Mexico, seeing what you need as a coaching staff to compete at the Big East level. And also, I think that's the biggest thing. You're getting an understanding now. He was at Minnesota for 8 years. but Minnesota is probably the lowest job
Sure.
in the Big Ten as far as resources go. And so then you go to New Mexico, where you're the king of the dance in the Mountain West. You win the Mountain West in back-to-back years. Now you come to the Big East, where you have St. John's, you have UConn, you have Creighton, you have these big-time teams that are contending for national championships in UConn and St. John's. And that's not what was happening at New Mexico. You have to adjust. You have to change how you recruit. And I think the coaching staff, through an NIL lens, will learn a lot this year about, what they need going forward. I think it'll be a good year for them from that perspective. And, again, you just hope that the people that are giving the money and the people that need to understand the vision do, so that they are set up for success and give Richard what he needs over the next couple of years.
Do you think it's possible that, if this season continues like it's going and, this team isn't competitive at all in the Big East, that those big pockets do get frustrated and rescind their energy, rescind their money, rescind everything backing the program? Do you think that's possible, or do you feel as though the big pockets are fully behind the future of this program?
It's a great question, and it's one I wish I really had a better answer to, because it's always people with a lot of money. You're considering this an investment, and right now, if you invested $6 million into a team that, quite honestly, if it plays like it did on Monday, will be lucky to win 10 games this season. That's hard to convince people with a lot of money that there's a good return on investment there. At the same time, though, a lot of people that are donating a lot of money to Xavier are invested in the well-being of the school, in the well-being of the basketball program that's been built up over the last 35 seasons, and they don't want to see it fall to a Seton Hall or a DePaul level, which can happen quickly. I mean, you look at Seton Hall, they were competing with Kevin Willard in the Big East. Right. You had some serious talent on Seton Hall teams 7-8 years ago, and now all of a sudden they're the laughingstock of the Big East. DePaul, they've never been great in the last 20 years, but they at least kind of put some resources behind their team with Chris Holtmann in the last 2 years. Now they lose to Buffalo last night. Their season's effectively over before it even really gets off the ground. So if you're a Xavier donor, you don't want to see this team fall to that kind of a level. And that's where I think when push comes to shove, the money will be there for Richard and his team to compete.
Final question on Xavier is, Monday was the worst loss at Cintas Center in over a decade. That never happened when you were the MC. Do you feel partly responsible for Monday's loss since you're no longer the MC?
I think we all just really have to look in the mirror and assess what we can do better, and I think for myself, that's something that clearly, like you said, it didn't happen, but at the same time, you control what you can control, Reed, and you, again, just have to get back to the drawing board, get back to practice, and keep moving forward.
Well, I would like to get better, but I need guidance from the head coach. I need him to put out grades on how to know where I stand, and I didn't see the grades on after Monday's loss, so maybe he'll come out with some late week grades.
No report card. What would you say would be your report card, Reed? What was your report card from Monday?
Offense F, defense F, student section A+. The guy in 134 row D, seat 12's nachos, A-, because we know Cintas Center has great nachos. So that's my report card on the Xavier Musketeers. Let's talk about UC. And obviously Dayton, they played a big game yesterday. It was a game that was interesting because watching it was tough to watch at times. And I know you were calling the Butler game. But at times it was a tough watch. But you beat Dayton at home by 12 points. Yeah. And kind of the energy following that game was, you beat a good team like Dayton in 12 points. What was your takeaway from the Bearcats off their win yesterday against UD?
Yeah, I went back to watch it last night when I got home, and it did definitely feel like a typical Cincinnati game in the last couple of years where you had so many opportunities to pull away in the game, and you never did because you had 24 turnovers. But at the same time, Dayton, it felt like a classic Dayton game where they only make 2 threes, one of their worst three-point percentages in years, 2 for whatever it was, 25 from 3. Cincinnati kept leaving the door open for Dayton to come back, and they never could they could just never get over the hump. Dayton right now, they have the talent to be an NCAA tournament team. I firmly believe that Dayton has the NCAA tournament capabilities on their roster to get back there and to be a dangerous team in the A10. They are being held back right now for some reason by just coaching decisions that I don't understand, lineups that don't make a ton of sense. And I don't really get why Dayton can't get over the hump right now, because it feels like I said they have the talent on the team to be able to do it. You see, I mean, credit to Day Thomas and Sean Abayev last night. They both played fantastic, especially for Sean Abayev. And I know it's not technically a high major game, but it's the first true test of the season for Cincinnati. He passes it. Day Thomas played a spectacular game, both on both sides of the ball. For Dayton, Amal Latang, not great. They need him to be better. They need him to be a lot better this year. It was a clunky game, but in the end, for Cincinnati to get the win like that over a local school, it's always important for all these teams that play each other around the Cincinnati area. You're competing in recruiting ground. It's good for Cincinnati to get that win, and you survived it at the end of the day. And now you do have a lot of things to clean up. Only one game for Cincinnati between now and the game against Louisville at Heritage Bank next week. But still, I would say for Cincinnati to win that game at home, it's important, and they got it done.
It felt like you just mentioned it feels like Dayton has the talent to get there, and it feels like they've had the talent to get to the NCAA tournament for the past few years. But you mentioned, rotation pieces, and it feels like you just stopped short. Do you feel like the head coach Anthony Grant is the reason they haven't been able to get over that hump?
I think it might be.
Okay.
I think so. I think it might be, and he's been there for long enough now. He's obviously had very talented teams when he's been there, but I mean, look at last year. Last year, going into the conference season, it wasn't. The question was not, are they going to make the NCAA tournament? The question was, what seed are they going to be? And then they lose 3 games in the A10 that they had no business losing, back-to-back-to-back losses in the A10 that they had no business losing. At some point when you have talent like this, you've clearly gotten the talent to campus, you've recruited it, but now you got to win with it.
Last night they shoot 2 for 26. Is that a bigger telling of UD's struggles, or is that a telling of, hey, UC, put the clamps on?
I think 2 for 26 tells me it's more UD. That's not to take away necessarily from Cincinnati defensively, because I did think they played well defensively, but 2 for 26. At some point, when you take that many attempts, you're going to hit 5 or 6 at least. But no, 2. That's more of a reflection of Dayton, in my opinion.
Louisville played Kentucky last night. Dominated. Ryan Conwell had a really big game. Is Louisville for real?
Yes, Louisville's for real. In fact, I came onto this show, I was talking to Stoney, asked me for a national championship prediction before the season started, and I said Kentucky. And after that show, I sat there and I thought for a while, and I really did like a deep dive into both, because I hadn't thought about the direct comparison between the two teams as much as I probably should have at that point when I was on the show. And I started talking to some people that, familiar with both programs and trying to get an idea of where they were coming into the season. And the more and more I really dove into Louisville, the more I was impressed with this team, the roster construction. Obviously, the backcourt going into the season was going to be fantastic, probably the best backcourt in the country. Could the pieces down low fit? They clearly do. Now, again, Kentucky was missing Jaden Quaintance, who's one of the best players on the team, an interior presence that's going to help. But all of that said, yes, it ended up being a fairly close game by margin in the end. Louisville dominated that game. And even when Kentucky made their runs, they never got it back to a one-possession game. The closest it ever got was 4. So in the end, for Louisville, I think Louisville is a true national championship contending team that if they can put it together in March, I say that because for as much praise as Pat Kelsey has gotten in his career, he's never won an NCAA tournament game. He's been there, but he's never won an NCAA tournament game. In his decade plus of coaching, he's never won a game. So this has got to be the year. I mean, this team,
right.
if this team can't win a game in the NCAA tournament. This team is a team that can win the national championship. They got to put it together in March.
Well, I can tell you right now that Louisville is not going to settle for just making the NCAA tournament. You don't got to win one game. You got to win several games to stay around there. But he's got a good roster all together. Next Friday, UC, Louisville play. Does UC have a shot in your opinion?
Yeah, I think they have a shot. I think this is a game Louisville will probably be favored by 7-8 points in a neutral game. But I think Cincinnati has the pieces to make this game interesting. I don't think you should just write it off because of what happened last night with Louisville and Kentucky. But I do expect Louisville, just the way that UC can't have a performance last night and expect to win that game against Louisville. They just can't, because you need everything to go right if you're UC to have a chance against Louisville. And I think it can, but the question is, what can you do now against Louisville in a neutral site game? I would expect Louisville to be favored by 7 or 8 points, probably pick Louisville to win that game, but I don't think you can totally write it off.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Paul, for coming on here today. Where can they find all your stuff?
Rebound Rundown, at the Rebound Rundown. We have a great a cinematic recap of the game last night. Our videographer was at UC and UD, so that's coming up some point probably later this afternoon when he finishes that up. And the Rundown, follow it all season.
Yeah, we'll be following your escapades as a play-by-play announcer. Can't wait to see you on the CBS Sports Network.
Appreciate you guys, and give a shout-out to good old Jay. I know he's coming on after me, so
he will be.
Appreciate you guys for having me on.
You mentioned it. All roads lead to Hamilton, and we got a Hamiltonian coming on right after you, right. Paul. I'll see you at Gina sometime.
See you soon, Raid.
See you.
Enjoy the Northern Lights.
We'll do. You know what? That was a really good, and we're going to have Jay Morrison on here in just a few seconds. I do want to touch on this piece, and I thought that was a really, really good interview. He stopped short of talking about the Xavier season. And from some things that I've heard about following, the roster that Xavier has this year, it was that they were strategic in their NIL spending, right? Everything came on really late. Sean Miller goes to Texas, kind of throws apart your entire plan or the entire future of your program in the short term. And instead of trying to haphazardly throw together and wasting this NIL collective that Xavier has, which is already in the middle of the Big East, maybe you can be a little more economic and look forward not just into 2025, 2026, but in 2026, 2027. The problem comes is what happens if this season completely derails and all the confidence that people have, the big money, the big budgets, they don't like to see their money being wasted, and they don't see the long-term plan. So something to keep your eye on this season for the Xavier Musketeers. But we mentioned him, Jay Morrison, coming on. We're going to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. Jay, thank you so much for hopping on here. I know we've been trying to get you on the show, and I really do appreciate it. You are Hamilton High School Volleyball's biggest fan, I hear. And also,
I am, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They had a really good year this year. I just got made fun of for always bringing up Hamilton, but I'll never stop, Jay. I'll never stop. So thank you so much for coming on the show. All right, I want to open this up. Obviously, Monday, the Cincinnati Bengals make big news around the entire world with saying that Joe Burrow is back to practice. He's got 21 days to be activated. Kind of caught us as fans off, kind of caught the national media off guard. Simply, was this an open secret kind of from the guys that are close to the team that he was ahead of the timeline, that you thought he would be coming back to practice here soon? Or did this catch even you off guard?
Oh, yeah. Caught me by surprise. I think that's one of the most remarkable things about it is they were able to keep this secret. And, it's a good sign, obviously, that his rehab is going that well. And they opened the 21-day window, but was not expecting that. They changed around the schedule on Monday, and they moved the Zach Taylor press conference from after practice to before practice. So sometimes that's a clue that something is up, that maybe Zach wants to talk about something and address it before the media go into the locker room and start talking to players about it. So we thought maybe some sort of transaction was coming, but was not expecting it to be Burrow's practice window opening.
So now the big question is the practice window opens, and Joe kind of had a long pause when asked when he is expecting to come back, and it seems like he is absolutely going to come back this season. But the question was, will he be back for that Thanksgiving Thursday night football game against the Baltimore Ravens? We've been talking about it on the show ever since that news broke. What's your confidence level that Joe Burrow plays on Thanksgiving?
I'd say less than 50%. Okay. I that makes the most sense. He's all about the optics and coming back in prime time on a holiday. It's going to be one of the most watched games of the year because everybody's home on Thanksgiving. Last year, the numbers were huge for that Thursday night game on Thanksgiving. I think that's a little quick, and people need to remember that the 21-day window is not the deadline for him to play. It's simply the deadline for them to add him to the 53-man roster. So that 21-day window expires on the Monday after Thanksgiving, which would be the Monday of the Buffalo week. And it feels more likely that would be the game. The Buffalo game was when we would see him back. I know he's talked in the past how much he would love to play on Thanksgiving or Christmas, growing up watching those games. And it's a huge game, obviously, if they can beat Pittsburgh this week. And then that's another division game, and that's really their only path to the playoffs is to win this division. So it makes a lot of sense, but I just think he's already so far ahead of what they expected him to be that him coming back for that game, I think Buffalo is the more likely.
So when you say it's less than 50%, you are basing that off of just the injury itself, and if they lose this game Sunday, does that put it at 0? Because obviously there's some working mechanisms in the scheduling and having to win this division and everything like that. If they lose this game, do you think that puts it at 0?
No, I wouldn't say 0. I wouldn't even put it that much lower than 50. He kind of said there are other variables that are going to determine when he'll come back. But if he's healthy, he's playing. I don't care what their record is. He's not going to want to sit out. The coaching staff's not going to want him to sit out. If they lose the next 3 and they're 3-9, the coaching staff could be fighting for their jobs. So I can't see the front office sitting him down. And there's a lot of reasons to have him come back. And number one, it's not an injury. If the doctors say there's a good chance of re-aggravation and setting yourself back in another surgery, then sure, shut him down. But if the doctors give him the all clear, I think even if the playoffs aren't really in reach, there's a good reason for him to play. Number one, he's going to want to. Number two, this can kind of be almost like a training camp kind of situation where you're working on something new. We've seen this offense really the running game kind of really take off. They go under center more, and the play action stuff that they're leaning into. And Burrow doesn't like to go under center. He wants to sit back and shotgun, survey the field. He just doesn't like turning his back to the defense. I think he's seen what this offense has become with Flacco, and that the final 4 or 5 games could be a good chance for him to kind of get acclimated to going under center more and seeing how he works in that type of scheme. So I think there's a lot of reasons that we're going to see him back regardless of what the record looks like. When he's healthy, I expect him to play.
All right, if he's healthy, he's going to play. In your opinion, do you find that wise if the season is done? If they lose these next 2 games to the Steelers and the Patriots and then lose to they're 3-9 and Joe Burrow's healthy and he's wanting to play, do you think that's wise based on he is the future of this franchise and has been for the last 5 years?
Yeah, I don't know if wise is the right word, but you just can't play the game, the what if game, and be worried about injuries and what could possibly happen. And the offensive line's playing better. Burrow's said it so many times in his career that every rep is a valuable rep, and it's a risk for sure because if he is to suffer some sort of serious injury, which is not out of the question given his history, then you're talking about maybe he's not ready for the start of next season. But I don't think they're going to play that worry what if game. I think they're going to throw caution to the wind, if you will, and stick him in there and try to get him as many reps as possible before the season's over.
Joe's great, one of the best in the world, and there's no doubt about it. This team is better when he's here, but we've watched this team for a few weeks now, and we know that the offense hasn't been what has been the problem, at least in these last 3 home games, these last 2 home games that they lose to the Jets and lose to the Bears. Is there anything that you are seeing, or is there any cause for optimism that this defense, which is historically bad and at times hilariously bad, is there any reason to think that this defense could be playing better and this team could be a real competitor here in the AFC, especially in the AFC North?
None whatsoever. I don't see it. There's not guys on the bench that they can put in there. The trading deadline's over. You're stuck with what you've got. Scheme-wise, we saw it last year where Lou kind of threw his hands up and said, all right, it's now or never. We're going to simplify. They simplified the defense. They went on a run. The defense played a little better. The offense played great. They win the final 5 games. This Al Golden scheme is already pretty simple. He's talked openly about not wanting to keep adding to it and putting in more and more installs. The guys, the players' heads are already, I don't know if their heads are swimming because it is a simple scheme, but that you got young guys and their eyes and their feet, a lot of false steps. They're not seeing things right. And this is as simple as it's going to get. And I don't know what's going to turn it around. I mean, a Trey Hendrickson return would certainly help. I think if he plays in the fourth quarter against the Jets and the Bears, they probably win both those games because he is a closer and he gets one more pressure, one more sack in those games, and that could have been the difference. But that was kind of the hidden headline on Monday with Burrow coming back was Zach basically ruled Trey out again for this week against Pittsburgh. He said he's doubtful, and he always says we'll see how he gets through the week, and he didn't even go there. He said he's doubtful, and so you start wondering, well, when is he going to be back? Is he making business decisions? Is he looking at the record and saying, I'm not playing until I'm 100%? He's fought through things in the past. I don't see it with this defense. I don't know where the pressure is going to come from. I think Dax Hill is playing pretty well. DJ Turner's playing great. Beyond that, it's a mess. And I don't think there's a fix that exists in 2025.
I was hoping that you'd spend some optimism here, but obviously I appreciate your honesty. Because I wasn't needing it just for optimistic sake. I was needing it for me as a fan's sake. I needed some optimism there. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but one question I was going to ask was how much of this is Al Golden's scheme and how much of this is just the players that they have and the talent level that they have on the defensive side. And I felt like you were almost there saying it, but how much is this? Is it more the scheme or is it the players that they have?
It's the players. I mean, they did the right thing. They invested all these top 100 picks on the defensive side of the ball. They knew they were set with Jamar and T and Joe Burrow, and that you've got guys that you feel good about on the offensive line and Orlando and Amarius Mims, and so they loaded up on defense, and they just have not been able to get anything close to the value of the picks for these guys. Right. It's a big reason Lou Anarumo was gone. Not just the performance on the field, but the inability to develop these young guys. And, Cam Taylor's taken a step back, and Miles Murphy's never shown anything as a first-round pick. And Shamar Stewart he looks lost out there. He would look great in training camp. And now you get into where it's actually physical, and he's just getting manhandled. And, Chris Jenkins, second-round pick last year, he's yet to really kind of live up to his billing. And the rookie linebackers are, again, if you drop those 2 rookie linebackers on a defense with a lot of stars, I think it looks a whole lot different. They can kind of feel their way, and they've got guys that'll have their back. But you put them in the middle of this mess, and it's just even more glaring, the deficiencies. And, both those guys are Barrett Carter and Demetrius Knight Jr. are among the league leaders in missed tackles. And so Al is a good coach. I don't think his scheme is overly simple just because he doesn't have it in him. He just doesn't have the horses to kind of go out there and throw crazy stuff at teams and all these exotic blitzes. I think it eventually will evolve into something more in depth, but right now you're just trying to get guys to see what's happening and make a tackle.
Last year, they get rid of Lou Anarumo because the defense was, once again, the reason that they did not make the postseason last year. Kept them out of several games. This year, it feels like, and there's been noise around Zach Taylor before, but it feels like the noise is getting louder and louder. It's getting, for the first time as a fan, as a Cincinnati Bengals fan, it feels like the noise is incredibly loud around Duke Tobin. They have now been embarrassed in 6 of their last 7 games. How warm are both Zach Taylor's and Duke Tobin's seat at the end of this year? Obviously, they're not going to make a move midseason, but they're coming in this year. How warm do you think their seat is?
I don't think they're that warm.
Really?
I just Zach especially, because he is an offensive-minded coach. I know he's the head coach; he's responsible for everything, but. You look what he's done. Burrow goes down, and what they've done with Joe Flacco is remarkable. And I think the relationship he has with Joe Burrow and the way they work together, and the fact that he hasn't lost that locker room, the players still believe, they're still fighting. Now, there's no lack of effort out there or going through the motions or anything like that. It's just the personnel on defense, and I think. That's why, if anybody should be on the hot seat, it's Duke, because this roster construction is what's the biggest reason for what's going on right now. I just don't see them moving on from him. They have had him in the building. He's as close to family as possible. He's been here for a long time. Paul Brown kind of told Mike before he took over, you never give up control of the team to somebody from the outside, and they've kind of done that with Duke because he is the GM. He doesn't have the title, but he's the GM, and I just don't see them moving on from him unless it would be a mid-season thing where they just get so fed up because the season ends and everybody steps back and they have their meetings and hope springs eternal and next year will be different. The draft will be different, and they just keep going through this cycle, and I'd be really surprised to see them, regardless of what happens the rest of the year, to see them move on from Duke. It just feels like he's entrenched there, and you don't want to say lifetime contract, but it feels close to that.
Yeah, it's I agree with what you said about Zach, and when you're an offensive guy and the offense looks like it does, it's hard to move from that. But man. So let me ask you this. If this season continues the way that it's trending, which is, a team that's out of the postseason once again, and the defense continues to look like it does, and, this team has a top 12 pick and has just a really, really poor season, is it fair to characterize that there will be no sweeping changes at the top of the organization going into next year?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not Duke or Zach, I don't know what else would qualify. I mean, they're not going to move on from Dan Pitcher, the offensive coordinator. The offense isn't the problem. And a lot of those defensive position coaches are young and they're high on them. And I can't see them getting rid of Al Golden after one season, knowing what the roster he's had to work with. So unless they lose every game here on out and it's ugly, I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to recalibrate and say that was an aberration. Burrow got hurt again, all the other things that we've talked about, and they're just going to do what they do and hope that they will win in 2026.
Yeah, it's been ugly for the last 7 weeks, so it might get ugly. It might continue to be ugly going forward, but Joe Burrow will come back at some point this season as long as there's no major setback. Jay, thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can they find your stuff?
Yeah, well, think about this real quick. They gave up 47 to Caleb Williams and 39 to Justin Fields, and here comes Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson twice, Drake May, and Josh Allen. So, yeah.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
Thanks
so
for reminding me.
That's another reason not to think this defense is going to get any better. But, you can follow me on X at @byjmorrison. BengalsTalk.com, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. All my stuff is up on there. And then the Growler podcast I do with Paul Dehner Jr. We just recorded the latest episode. We just wrapped that up about an hour or so ago, so that'll be up later today. A lot of different platforms to find my work.
Thank you so much, Jay, for coming on. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thanks.
Yep. He said a lot of things, and I was trying to drill in there. I was looking for some positive spin. And rightfully so, he said what we all know deep down, which is we can try to build up as much optimism as we possibly can. But we know there's no cavalry over the hillside for this defense. We know that there isn't really anything that makes you think that major change, major sweeping change is going to happen in this organization because we've known what the Cincinnati Bengals do, and that's hold on to coaches and hold on to Duke Tobin for a long, long time. Really, the only two things that you can look for when it turns to, hey, this can have an optimistic spin, which is, A, Joe Burrow will come back at some point this season. And this offense has looked very, very good, so maybe they can luck out and win one of these shootout-style games against the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Buffalo Bills or the Baltimore Ravens. And then B, the second thing that you can kind of hope for, and it is truly just hope, which is, these young players get better. Toss your hands up and say, maybe these young players will get better. Stone, I don't know if you had any major takeaways here as we go into the final few minutes from that interview with Jay.
Yeah, I think, I've had the same thought process that Zach's not going anywhere. I don't think he is. I think it would be a mistake to move off him. The offense has been great. He's an offensive coach. I understand he's the head coach there as well, and he's responsible for the whole operation. But I agree with a lot of what Jay said, even back to the beginning of the conversation. I know you have some questions or concerns, and rightfully so, about Joe Burrow coming back if you're eliminated, but he's the quarterback. Paying him big-time money, and if he's healthy, right, you don't want to rush him back, but if he's healthy, I don't care what the record is. He should go out there and play football, and these coaches definitely want that to be the case. I think the fan base should as well, right? It's football. It's a violent game. Every time somebody steps out on the field, there's an opportunity for them to get injured. Unfortunately, Joe Burrow has a history of that happening frequently, right? But, as the QB1 of this team, they weren't going to bench him down the stretch if they were eliminated, right? If he would have played every single game this year and then they got eliminated, would they have benched him? Maybe for the final game, but not the final stretch, right? So I absolutely agree with Jay. I think he should go out there and play if he's healthy and, not – he said, around 50%, a little bit less than 50% that he plays on Thanksgiving. We'll see. Based on the press conference, very clear that Burrow wants to go for Thanksgiving. But, you just hope that this team can hold on for a little bit before when he ultimately comes back some point this year.
Yeah. I hear what you and Jay said. I fully hear what you guys say about if Joe's healthy, he plays, regardless of where the season is, regardless of everything. If he's healthy, he plays. This is a violent sport. You can't play scared. And if you got your all-world quarterback, as fans, we should just be excited to watch him play once again. But I'll push back and I'll say the reason that fans like me and a lot of fans out there are saying they should not play if the season's done, if they lose these next two games, if they lose to the Bills and the Pats and the Ravens and all these teams, if they go to 3-8, 3-9, the reason you should not play Joe Burrow isn't because it's the safe thing to do, is because other than it's what you're supposed to do, there's no argument to say that he should play. There is absolutely none, because it hurt your draft stock. It puts your quarterback in a quarterback with injury-prone career, with an injury-prone career, puts him in danger. There is no reason that he should play other than it's the competitive thing to do. And when the season's done, I'm not worried about the competitive thing to do anymore. I'm worried about the competitive thing to do into 2026, which is have a healthy Joe Burrow, which is to have higher draft capital, which is all those things. But we'll approach that bridge when we get there, because even though I just said that, if he's healthy, he is going to play, because Zach Taylor's fighting for his job. Duke Tobin's fighting for his job. And I'll tell you right now, 3-14 looks a lot worse than 7-10, than 6-11, whatever the Cincinnati Bengals would be if Joe Burrow plays the final 5 games. So, Stone, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much to Paul Fritchner and Jay Morrison. That was really, really good stuff. I appreciate them coming on. Thank you so much for watching this, for the podcasters. Be sure to share, tell your friends, give us a like here on the YouTube, subscribe, hit the notification bell. We'll be having some more content coming out later today. Stone Shields, have a great show.
Yes, sir.
Mark Sheldon will be on here. The Stone Shields Show coming right up. See you tomorrow.
Here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show here on a Wednesday. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us here this morning. Lots to talk about here on today's show. We got Mark Sheldon, MLB.com. He covers the Cincinnati Reds. Looking forward to talking to him in about 10 minutes. That should be exciting. Plenty of offseason Reds topics to get to on the show. Obviously, we're going to talk about Hunter Green, right? We're going to talk about a guy named Kyle Schwarber that a lot of people in Reds country certainly are throwing that name around quite a bit these days. We'll talk defense, bullpen, starting pitching. We'll kind of go through all of it with Mark Sheldon. Really looking forward to that conversation here in about 10 minutes on our show. The UC Bearcats won last night, and for anybody that watched that game, bit of a painful watch, right? Bit of a painful watch. Who would have thought? You have this new roster that you assemble. You got these highly touted guys, right? Sean Abayev, who had a good game, who had a really solid game, and I was really impressed with him. But Day Thomas, the guy that was on your team last year, he's the reason you won that game, right? Didn't miss a single free throw, was great defensively, made some shots, 20 points. And, so you have this completely newly built team with new faces all over the place. And you don't win that game last night without Day Thomas. Dayton was horrendous in the game there as well. Turnovers all over the place. Really sloppy performance, but 3-0. 3-0 and another opportunity to play another game before Louisville, who looked really good against Kentucky last night. What a great environment there. Pat Kelsey, obviously, all of us here in Cincinnati, we're usually cheering on Pat Kelsey. He's got a really good team. They got snipers all over the place, and Xavier certainly could use Conwell as he was lighting it up last night from distance. And keep an eye on that Louisville team. They look special. And I know Kentucky sort of relatively made it close there at the end, but that was a dominant performance from the Louisville Cardinals. College football top 10. We do it every Wednesday here at the show. Second time the rankings for the actual college football playoff rankings, right, came out last night, and I got some takeaways from that. Again, no real issues with it. I know I'm kind of maybe in the minority that I got Alabama a little bit higher than A&M and Indiana. I don't know if a ton of people out there believe that, but we'll go through our rankings. There's a team that's kind of making a debut here that we thought was going to be really good at the beginning of the year, and then they kind of went radio silent, and now all of a sudden they're gaining a little bit of momentum here as well. Paul Dehner Jr. of The Athletic, he put out a piece this morning kind of breaking down the Bengals rookie class, right? Talked about it at length, really, in the offseason leading up to the season. Like, hey, you got these 6 guys. They need to come in. They need to be pretty special for a rookie class. And you'd be in a tough spot if they just came in and were mediocre, right? Well, they've come in and been bad. And obviously the Bengals are paying the price for that. We'll talk about that a little bit after we do our college football top 10 and talk to Mark Sheldon of MLB.com. Also some sports headlines to close out today's show. The Dallas Mavericks, they fired Nico Harrison, right, after, several months, 9 months or so after he traded Luka Doncic. Yep, that usually will happen if you trade away Luka Doncic and then start the season as poorly as the Mavericks had, despite, of course, getting the number 1 overall pick. So we'll talk about Nico a little bit. Again, Louisville beats Kentucky. Some thoughts on that. Jameis Winston named backup quarterback for the Giants, a move that should have been made a long time ago, right? Maybe Brian Daboll would still have a job with the Giants if that was the case. Travis Hunter, season-ending surgery. Remember, the Jags traded up in the draft, gave away some capital in order to get him. And, year 1, watching him out there, yeah, he's a really athletic guy, but I don't know if that was the right move there. Tito didn't win Manager of the Year. I don't think that should surprise anybody. He came in second. That honor went to Pat Murphy, who, of course, the manager of the Brewers. Collapsed and got smacked in the postseason by the Dodgers, but they won a ton of games in the regular season, and obviously a well-deserved honor for Pat Murphy. And Stephen Vogt wins it again for the Guardians. What a run they went on. What are they, 15 games out with not much time left. They made up all the ground, so certainly a deserving award there as well. Also some Bill Belichick stuff. The Carolina year this year, has it been good? Not really, but did you really expect it to be great? Like, did you expect him to come in and, dominate the conference? Probably not, but, the Giants' job's open. He's got connections there, obviously, in New York. Don't know why, if you're an NFL team, you would even consider bringing in Bill Belichick, but we'll talk about that a little bit there as well to wrap out today's show. But UC, they went ugly last night. If there's one word, if you have a one-word takeaway as it relates to this basketball game, it would be turnovers. That is the word. And, we talked about this with Keegan Nickerson. We talked about this with Hudson Cloukey, right? The first 2 games that Cincinnati plays, and he played Western Carolina and Georgia State, right? You can get away with a lot in those games and still have an opportunity to win. And, they did, but they turned the ball over a lot. And you're sitting here going into this game against Dayton, who Paul Fritchner alluded to this, a little bit earlier on off the bench. By the way, those interviews with Reed, great stuff from him. Jay Morrison, Paul Fritchner, they'll be out on the channel later this afternoon and be out in podcast form there as well when we get our podcasts. But he thinks that, Dayton's kind of a solid team. And look, I probably defer to Paul absolutely when it comes to that. This is my first time watching Dayton this year, and I get they couldn't make anything. Hit 2 of 26 from 3. That's dreadful. But I look at that Dayton team. I don't know. If they're really, a solid team. And obviously UC wins the game. They win by 12. They cover the spread. But if you're a Bearcat fan, I don't know if you're exactly excited, on the heels of that game. And I hate to be a Debbie Downer here on a Wednesday morning, but I just you feel good about Sean Abayev. Like, okay, he's this highly touted recruit, your best recruit since, Lance Stevenson, which has been quite some time. It's a big-time get for Wes. He played well in the game. He deserves a lot of credit, and I'll be a little bit nitpicky here. There's some body language stuff with him that I didn't love, right? And, Wes is trying to coach him up, and he looked kind of, disconnected maybe. And maybe I'm just reading into it a little bit too much. But there's some of that stuff I would like to see cleaned up. It always frustrates me with highly talented guys. Like, if I came in, this is just me. Obviously, I'm sitting here talking to you guys. I'm not out playing high-level athletics here at this point. But if I was a 5-star guy that when I stepped out on the floor, I was probably the most talented guy out there for the majority of the times I stepped out on the floor, I would want to make sure everything that I did from an intangible perspective was buttoned up. Like, I would want to be coachable. I would want to be a really good teammate. Because if you can execute there on the margins and you pair it with the talent that you have, you're a really, really good player. And I don't mean to sit here and call out Sean Abayev, right? It's very early, obviously, in his career here to this point. And he had a good game. Like, he played well. Without Sean Abayev, I don't know if you win this game. But there's some little things that I would like to see get cleaned up a little bit and be a little bit more buttoned up. But as far as on-the-floor performance, he played well. I think he only played 19 minutes. Got the start, but only played about 19 minutes in the game. Mentioned this at the top. Day Thomas, he's the reason you won the ball game. Right? And, it was kind of funny because Day Thomas, of course, led the team in scoring last year, right? And then you strip everything down, right? Jizzle's gone, Skillings hits the portal. It's a completely different team. But then Day comes back, and Wes has always loved Day, and rightfully so. He plays his butt off, works his butt off. And, he's been a good player for UC. Has it equated to a ton of wins? Not necessarily, but he's been a really good player. And you see this roster, and you kind of think, Day is going to take a bit of a step back and more of a back seat and have a different kind of role here this year. But they needed him, right? 12 of 12 from the free throw line, that's another thing, right? Talk about turnovers for the Cincinnati Bearcat team. You pair it with the lack of making free throws. They were horrible from the charity stripe. You remove Buck Harris and Day Thomas, who, Buck, I think, was 6'8", Thomas 12 for 12. Besides them, you missed, all of your free throws. That can't happen. You're going to turn the ball over at an absurd rate and miss your free throws, right? That's something that drives me nuts with college basketball, right? I don't care if you're sitting there at 6'10", right, or you're a guy that's not predominantly a shooter. You got to be able to execute from the charity stripe, right? And UC could not do that whatsoever in the game last night. Bob Miller had a bit of a slow start to the game. I think, there's some dispute on who's the best player. Could it be a Sean Abayev type of guy? Could it be Bob Miller? It took him a while. He didn't score till the second half, but I was really pleased with his performance. He's definitely a presence on the glass. He didn't make a free throw, though, by the way, 0 for 4 at the charity stripe for Baba. But I think there's some intriguing things that you saw from Miller. You see the athleticism, right? He can handle the ball fine for a guy that is his size. And, he made some physical plays there. He got called for the flagrant there, in the first half, which some of these calls in college basketball these days, is that really, a flagrant situation there? But I was pleased with Bob Miller, but the turnovers. And I understand Wes is talking about, there's going to be growing pains, right, when you change your play style and change your identity, right? Because it's pretty obvious. They play a lot more faster paced, right, this Wes Miller team than any previous Wes Miller teams. But it's one thing to have growing pains. It's another thing to turn the ball over 24 times. And just the lack of, wanting to protect the ball and just some careless stuff there as well was pretty alarming. But, once the Bearcats kind of found their stroke there in the second half and shot the ball well, you saw kind of the potential of this team. And, there were elements in the game where Dayton was kind of trying to close the distance and had a good chance to get back in the game, and somebody would hit a big shot, whether it be Day or somebody else. Kirk Creesa, right, hit a few more. And I think I would like to see him take some more shots there for the Cats because, Kirk Creesa has played a ton of college basketball all over the country, right? And, I think when he's shooting the basketball a lot, high volume, I think that's probably when Cincinnati is at their best, to be completely honest with you. So a sloppy game. They have some time here to get things corrected before Louisville at Heritage Bank. And if Louisville last night, they look good, and West got a lot to work on if they want to be competitive, certainly in that basketball game. All right, let's transition our conversation a little bit here to the Cincinnati Reds, and we've got a guest standing by ready to join us here on the show, and our guest is Mark Sheldon. He does a tremendous job covering the Cincinnati Reds for MLB.com. Mark, how's it going? And I appreciate you stopping by here in November to talk some Cincinnati Reds baseball. Mark,
can you hear me?
Oh, I got you now, Mark. Sorry
about that. How you doing, Stone? Sorry. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yes. All good over here on my end. I appreciate you making some time joining us here on the show. I want to start with this. When I look at the Reds season here in 2025, when teams go out to spring training and they begin to get ready for opening day, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say all 30 teams in Major League Baseball have obviously everyone wants to win the World Series, but I don't think everybody can sit there and say it's World Series or bust. And I certainly don't think Cincinnati could have said that going into this past season. And, they win some games. They could have been down and out multiple different times, obviously, and they find a way to make the postseason. And in my opinion, when I look at this, I think it was a successful year for the Cincinnati Reds. Now, they can't just run it back with the same roster and hope to, win a world championship next year. But in my opinion, I think it was a successful year. What's kind of your take on that as we look back at 2025?
I think it was a successful year in most ways. Certainly, they went from 77 wins to 83 wins. I think that's a pretty good jump. That doesn't happen very often. Usually it's more incremental than that. Sometimes it's only 1 or 2 wins improvements, and then they jump 6 wins. They did make the postseason, which I think for this group, even though it didn't go well and they got swept by the Dodgers, I still think getting that experience, every game in the last month felt like a playoff game. So I think there's a value in that experience for a lot of the guys that never went through that before. Certainly there were some shortcomings, but I think overall, having Terry Francona in his first year, the man knows how to get the most out of what he was given, and I think he did that very well this year, and that's obviously reflective in how he was received in Manager of the Year voting.
You captured the attention of Reds country about a month ago with your newsletter. I want to be very clear here. You didn't come out there and say, the Reds need to trade Hunter Green. That's absolutely not what you said. But you kind of just floated it out there, basically saying, obviously, the Reds need a power bat, obviously. And, Hunter Green's a really good player, and maybe a team would give up a power bat for Hunter Green. What's kind of your stance on that situation right now? Have you heard anything? Is there any chance they could potentially move Hunter Green? And in your opinion, if you're calling the shots, is that something that you would consider?
Well, I think it certainly is worth considering. He is their biggest and best trade chip. However, Nick Krall last night in Las Vegas during the general managers meetings essentially tamped or curbed any speculation that that's going to be in play. He more or less said that's not currently on the table. So I would not expect Green to get traded at this point. However, I do think there's value in being bold. And I know that there's obviously a lot of people that don't like the idea of moving Hunter Green because of his talent, and I get it. But at the same time, the Reds don't have a whole lot they don't have any payroll room. They're going to have the same payroll as next year when they figure out how to fill in the free agents they lost and then give the raises to the arbitration guys. They only have a few trade chips, and Hunter Green is one of them, whether people like it or not. They have depth at rotation. So if they don't move Hunter Green, maybe they look at a different starter they get moved. However, Nick Krall also put the kibosh on likely that happening as well. So how they end up being creative enough to fill their needs and keep their rotation depth, I will be very curious to see how that plays out this winter.
When I think about the Reds offseason to this point, there's kind of 2 big names that certainly the fan base are throwing out there. One, of course, is Hunter Green, who we just touched on. The other is a player by the name of Kyle Schwarber. And as you mentioned, Nick Krall said payroll for this year expected to be very similar to last year, which, yeah, big shocker there as it relates to that. But is there any way the Reds could make an actual run at Kyle Schwarber this offseason, or is that just Fantasyland stuff?
I think it definitely drifts closer to Fantasyland. The only thing I would say is if somehow, some way, Schwarber felt very sentimental about coming to Cincinnati and playing for his hometown, even for one season. Like, let's say, hypothetically, he doesn't get any offers that he likes, and he's looking for a 1-year pillow contract to kind of to kind of go somewhere and then reset the market next year, that's about the only way I see the Reds being in play. But even then, what are we looking at for that 1 year? It's going to be an astronomical figure. So I don't know if the Reds will be willing to give up basically a quarter of their budget to fill in with a Kyle Schwarber for one season or even multiple seasons. I just don't see that, because it would prevent them from doing other things. And we've seen in the past, in the Wayback Machine, when they brought in a lot of high-priced sluggers, let's say like Ken Griffey Jr., they didn't have room to do the other things they needed to do to be a complete team. And I think right now they can hit home runs at Great American Ballpark. They didn't this year, but they're capable of it. They have to find ways to pitch, play defense, and do the other things in order to have a well-rounded team to go further in the postseason.
Obviously, the offense, a tremendous struggle for the Reds last year, and there's a bunch of different stats that tell the story. But to me, the two that I'm looking at are your 21st in Major League Baseball in home runs with 167, and 28th in hard hit rate, only at 38.2%. You mentioned, Schwarber probably being a borderline pipe dream here at this point. Kind of putting you on the spot here. Is there any names out there that jump to mind immediately that realistically Cincinnati could go after and help add offense to this roster?
I haven't heard them. Let me state that I haven't heard them connected to any free agents yet, so that hasn't come through the pike. But you look at the list of names, and you see like a Ryan O'Hearn or a Cedric Mullins. Those are kind of the second tier. The guy in New York, now all of a sudden Trent Grisham, excuse me. Yep. Those kind of the names that maybe hit the second tier, the third tier of free agents, and those are the kind of guys they could still hit 20 some home runs and do the job. And I think really what you're looking for is just somebody to get behind Elly De La Cruz to make them think twice about pitching around him and throwing him only off speed or breaking pitches. And that's the kind of spot, Austin Hayes seemed to be that guy for a while, but then injuries kind of got in the way for him, and he was not able to be that guy enough. But that's what they need. They don't need a 60 home run hitter. They just need a guy that's dangerous enough to support Elly De La Cruz and the rest of the lineup.
When you're a small market team like the Reds, you got to play good defense. There's really no other way around that. And, throughout my life, the Reds haven't won a ton, but there have been years where they've played really, really good defense. Past couple years wouldn't say that, right? Obviously, some statistical improvement from 24 to last year as it relates to their defense. But once again, Elly is leading the majors in errors. I think you saw some stuff there from Spencer Steer. You throw him at first base, and, that worked out pretty well, certainly from a defensive side. But as you look to next year, can this defense, get better, in your opinion?
Certainly with Ke'Bryan Hayes at third base, that'll help on that side of the infield. I like to think that Ke'Bryan Hayes can make Elly De La Cruz a better fielder just by being there, and maybe not having to go after every single ball will help. But really what De La Cruz has to improve on is the routine plays. It's not been the spectacular plays, which is why he's a shortstop. They think he can make plays no one else can. He doesn't make the routine plays. Matt McClain is solid at second base, and certainly at first base, Steer was good. If he ends up playing that position again, that's a pretty good infield. It's the outfield. TJ Friedel's been a great defender. It's the corners they have to worry about, and we'll see what happens if Marte can hang on to that spot. I think it looks pretty good for him, and he played pretty good defense for a guy that never played it before at that position. So overall, they just have to make the plays, and that was something that kind of killed them, making cutoffs, making smart decisions, and things like that in the late innings. Those were some of the little things that really hurt them in some of those, first half games.
Let's talk about the rotation a little bit. You mentioned earlier about Green probably staying put for this team, and obviously you got your four guys in Green, Abbott, Dolo, and Singer. We're here in November. Obviously, a lot could happen. Do you think their goal is for Chase Burns, who obviously finished the season in the pen, to kind of be that fifth guy, or do you think they'll address the rotation a little bit more here this offseason?
Based on their limitations with the finances, I'd be surprised if they went out and added another starter. But you can certainly understand why you'd want to be greedy, because you don't want to lose guys to injury. When you think about Burns, he had an injury down the stretch. Then you throw in Lauder, Aguiar, and Williamson didn't pitch at all last season because of injuries. So their depth isn't as deep as maybe we all think it is, but I like that depth. I still think it's pretty good. And I think the battle for the fifth spot between possibly Burns and Lauder will be really interesting, because those guys are not only are they friends and they both went to Wake Forest and they rely on each other as friends and and colleagues and things like that. But they're both very talented pitchers in different ways. So if this rotation, the top four is what we say it is right now, which it looks like it will be, that will be one of the best things to watch in spring training 2026 is Lauder and Burns maybe dueling it out for the fifth spot. And who knows maybe we'll see what Williamson and Aguiar can do too, and Chase Petty.
From a bullpen perspective, there's a good chance that it looks a lot different this year for the Cincinnati Reds. And I think certainly towards the end of last year, they were really leaning on their bullpen. I think their bullpen was solid. And even in the David Bell era, I think they're, had some years where their bullpen was really, really good there as well. Emilio Pagan, obviously a free agent. He's expressed some interest in wanting to come back, but you could very well be in the market for a new closer there, right? Martinez, kind of the same situation there. You got your kind of mainstays with Ashcraft and Phillips. Definitely will be a piece of this bullpen next year. But as you evaluate this bullpen here, do you think in your eyes it's going to look a lot different?
It probably will in some areas. I think, you have Santillan, you have Graham Ashcraft that'll be back. Connor Phillips was very impressive when he came back in the last month of the season. He was essential. So I think you like those three guys in the bullpen. And then you look at Luis May, you look at Zach Maxwell, Yasver Zuleta. There are some guys that they have in the system that can come up. But one thing they don't have is an experienced big league closer. Maxwell certainly closed in the minors. I'm sure a lot of fans would love to see him do the thumbs down thing at the on the last out of the ninth inning. That'd be pretty fun. But he also has a lot of walks, and you want to make sure he can get that last out because the ninth inning is a tough operation, especially in the big leagues for a lot of pitchers. So they'll either go out and get a reliever with closing experience and have him be their closer, or maybe they get Pagan back, or maybe they have to go and have Santillan step up. He certainly showed he could do it in the eighth inning, and he had some save chances in the ninth a couple times. Maybe that's the route they take, but refilling the bullpen and namely finding someone to close, whether internally or externally, has got to be one of their top priorities.
Couple of deadlines coming up. The non-tender deadline, I believe, is November 21st. Any players the Reds could non-tender, and I think Lux and Benson are some possibilities there.
I'd be surprised if they non-tendered Lux.
Okay.
Benson, I don't know. That's a good one. I didn't think he was a non-tender guy going into the offseason. You looked at the guys maybe as Espinal and Sam Maul and Ian Jabot. And Maul's still here, and he's certainly a candidate. But Jabot and Espinal have already been taken off the roster, and they were outrighted, and they're already free agents. So I don't know if there's going to be any surprises with the non-tenders. They do have to add at least maybe 2 or 3 guys to protect them for the Rule 5 drafts. So
right.
We'll see what the numbers are. I think right now they're at 33. They have 7 openings on the 40-man.
The winter meetings obviously are coming up next month, and you hear just being around baseball, the winter meetings are coming up. But for a fan like me, I really have no idea what transpires in these meetings. I know you'll be covering them. Can you just kind of, peer back, take back the curtain a little bit and let us know exactly what kind of goes on in those meetings and what that's been like to cover?
It can depend on a year. Sometimes it's a big bore, and sometimes it's so busy you don't have time to relax. So it can go either way depending on your team and what your team's needs are. The Reds sometimes they've been very quiet at the winter meetings, and sometimes they've been pretty frisky. I would say that you go and when you get there, it's a huge trade show / convention for all of baseball, because that's the minor leagues are there. All the different team roles have meetings, whether it's the trainers or the PR people and certainly the executives. And because of all these people from baseball and the industry are all in one place, it makes sense that agents go as well. And of course, the agents, especially guys like Scott Boras now, have staked out their own thing. They have their own giant suites at the various hotels, and these all guys get together. So whenever everyone gets together in one place, deals are bound to happen. So it's not been unheard of, obviously, over the years to see a huge trade or a huge free agent signing get done at the winter meetings. I remember Albert Pujols when he signed it with the Angels. It happened in the wee hours, one meetings, and things like that. The Reds have famously traded what's his name? They traded Matt Latos and Alfredo Simon in a span of an hour once at the winter meetings, and they also got Josh Hamilton at the Rule 5 draft during the winter meeting. So you just never know what might happen. It's always kind of fun to go. Obviously, all the The writers get together as well, and we have our own meetings. So it's always an interesting time. There's a lot of schmoozing, a lot of hanging out, and then a lot of also debriefing with various clubs and sources to try to find out what's going on. You talk to agents, you talk to not only the club executives, but maybe the other guys that are the rank and file people in the baseball operations world, and you try to get a sense of what's happening. What are you guys talking? Who are you talking to? And what might happen. And for the Reds and for any team, the winter meetings is kind of, it's been built up so much that people feel like if they don't do anything at the winter meetings, the off season's a bust, and it's not. You got to remember there's still 2 more months after the winter meetings. And a lot of times what begins at the GM meetings or the winter meetings ends up coming to fruition at a later date. And I've seen that happen as well. That's how they got guys like Shin-Soo Choo in the past. That's how they traded Todd Frazier in the past. So things may happen after the winter meetings.
You mentioned the Rule 5 draft. The deadline to protect players from the Rule 5 draft is coming up here in a couple of days on the 18th. Any idea on some guys the Reds might protect? Edwin Arroyo, perhaps, a name that comes to mind there?
Yeah, Arroyo's certainly going to be one guy. Hector Rodriguez, one of their outfielders, is a top 20 prospect, will be another guy. After that, it's a little more murky. But I would say those are the 2 guys I would look at. Leo Balcazar is another guy, an infielder. He's like their 23rd ranked prospect. He could be one. But after that, I don't think you'll have too many guys get added. But at the same time, you don't want to let anyone get away if you can help it.
No doubt. Tito obviously was a finalist for Manager of the Year, didn't win. Murphy got that. I don't think that really was a surprise to anyone. But I know in the fan base, some people are split. Some people are a little bit frustrated with Tito. Some people, like myself, really back him. Obviously, some decisions he could have made differently in the Dodger series. Does it result in, a different end of that series? Probably not, in my opinion. But just your synopsis on Tito, year 1 of him. What did you like? What did you not like? And just going forward, do you think, obviously he's getting up there in age, already retired once. How long do you think he'll be in place here as the manager?
I don't want to speculate on how long. I mean, I think he's got a 3-year contract with 2 years to go. I'm sure he would love to stay until the job is done and get a World Series, another one for him and for the team and for Cincinnati. I thought he did a really good job. I think among the many things he brings to the table is he makes the players feel like they're invested. They all are accountable to not only him, but to each other. I think accountability was a big buzzword in the last offseason after David Bell was let go. And I think you saw more of that this year. You saw guys that they weren't performing, they didn't play, or they got moved. And you also, when a mistake was made, whether it was forgetting how many outs there were or running into an out, you saw Tito come pretty much right to them in the dugout and have a conversation, whether it was really quick or more prolonged. But those mistakes often didn't happen twice. And I think those are the kind of things that a manager does. He just brings instant credibility. He gets the most out of the players he's given. He doesn't complain about what he's not given. And I think this idea, even though it's so cliche, readers and even writers don't like hearing it, the one day at a time thing really did serve them well this year. No one got too depressed after a big loss, and nobody got too high after a big win. If you look at their winning streaks, I think they only had a 5-game winning streak, but they did not have a losing streak more than 5 games. They didn't get swept in any series until late August.
Yeah.
I think those are things that speak a lot to him. And he also, when he did have a team meeting, which weren't many, they had purpose. And you certainly saw it after the games in Sacramento. They got swept by the A's. And then they won 9 of their last 13. They were under 500 with 2 weeks left to go in the season, and they still made the playoffs with 83 wins. And I think that speaks a lot to him and his steady nature.
Mark Sheldon joined us of MLB.com. Got 2 more questions for you, Mark. Another conversation that a lot of people in Reds country like to have is, what to do with Ellie defensively, right? It seems like the plan is to keep him at short. Mentioned earlier in the interview, has led the MLB in errors back-to-back seasons. I just was curious on your thoughts on that. Are you fine with him staying at shortstop? There's people that love to say, put him in the outfield. What's kind of your take on that situation here as we look like we're going into another year of him playing short?
I just think I can understand the value of putting him in right field. It would be less abuse on his body, and he could maybe get more out of him offensively. But there's also a lot to be said for the fact that he does make plays that no other shortstop can make. Yep. And I think that's why they are so reluctant to move him. You can clean up the 5-hole errors, the ball between the legs and the throws that airmail the first baseman. And certainly you can work on concentration, but the one thing you cannot teach, the one thing you cannot create maybe is the instinctual plays he makes, whether it's running into the outfield or going to his left or right, or even coming in, and certainly his throwing. The fact that he can, on a pickoff, on a relay throw, he can buzz a 99-mile-an-hour seed to the plate and get a guy. I don't know how many guys can do that. So I think there's value, and that's why I would be reluctant to move him. But I also do see the value, and if you do put him in center field or right field, that he could be a really dynamic outfielder too. So I do see it from both sides, but at the moment, the club is not moving him. And now we're going to be heading into year 4. He's 2 years away from free agency after that. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
And finally, Mark, Reds Fest is returning in January. Going to be the first event at the newly renovated convention center. Have you heard anything interesting about that at all?
Not yet, no. Certainly, I would imagine all the members of the 40-man roster, unless they have a compelling reason, will be on hand, and the coaching staff, and obviously some alumni. I'm curious, of course, like anyone else, to see what they've done to the place, because it was certainly an aged convention center, and the Reds got a lot out of that place when it was there all those other years. But we'll see what they've done to inside of it. It looks pretty cool from the outside when I've driven by it, but right now it's early to say. But it'll be an interesting time, because by mid-January, there's a really good chance you might have a good sense of what the roster is going to look like going in. They often make some moves at the very beginning of camp or right after camp started. But for the most part, this will be the team they have, unlike in December when it's still pretty early. So we'll find out if they've made moves, and we'll see who's come and who's gone.
Mark, you obviously have your newsletter. Tell everybody about that, where they can find it, and just where they can find all your work here this offseason.
Yeah, I'm all over the place.
Yep.
I got the MLB.com and certainly Reds.com, and on Reds.com, I will have a newsletter, at least in the offseason, every Thursday. And the excerpt is always on there for the top part. And then from there, you can also click and either read that in length, or you can subscribe, and it's free. So I appreciate that. You can also find me on Instagram at Sheldon MLB, on Blue Sky at Sheldon MLB, and now on Reddit at Sheldon MLB. So lots of ways to communicate.
Well, Mark, I appreciate you, man. That's some awesome stuff. I appreciate you taking some time here to join us on the show, and we'd love to do it again sometime. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you, Stone. Take it easy.
Yes, sir. Mark Sheldon, great stuff. Was really looking forward to getting him on the show, talking Cincinnati Reds baseball, and he was gracious enough to give us some time here on a Wednesday. We covered a lot there. Obviously, some deadlines coming up for the Cincinnati Reds. Talked about that. Kind of went through all different layers of the team, right? Defensively, starting pitching. Obviously, offensively, got to talk Hunter Green there, and Kyle Schwarber. I think, a lot of us, when we use our minds, probably not going to happen. Now, when we start using our hearts a little bit, it's like, he could come home to Cincinnati. I think at some point in his career he will, but feels a little bit too early here in that process, because he's going to garner a big-time contract. And, probably not super realistic for the Reds, but obviously we can all continue to keep our fingers crossed and hope. But Mark Sheldon, MLB.com, tremendous job covering the Cincinnati Reds. He's been at it for a long time, and we appreciate his time. That interview will be up later today on the channel, and obviously when the podcast goes up, you can find it in there as well. Big shout out to Mark Sheldon and his time here on a Wednesday. All right, college football top 10. We do it every Wednesday here at the show. Got our CFP rankings yesterday, week 2 of that. Right, again, no real issues with it. It's kind of just everything will kind of work itself out, right? And there'll probably be, 2 or 3 teams that we argue about right before the bracket comes out. That's basically how it works. Even when it was a 14 playoff, that's kind of was the situation we found ourselves in. But everything beyond that kind of has a way of working itself out. So we'll go through our top 10 here on the show. And the 2 teams that I've got on the outside looking in right now are Utah and Vandy. And you can probably put Oklahoma in the mix there as well. I know Oklahoma is ranked 11. They've got some issues there offensively, and that's going to be a real good game as they go to Tuscaloosa this week to take on Alabama. Borderline upset alert opportunity there for the Sooners, and obviously they beat Alabama last year, but that was in Norman, this in Tuscaloosa. So I'm not super high on the Sooners. They're ranked at 11. I probably have Utah and Vandy a notch above them. Utah obviously has a couple of losses. They had a bye last week. They knocked the Bearcats all over the field, right? Dominated them from a physicality perspective. and ran the ball, really just had their way with them. And I still think they're a threat in the Big 12. Talking about the Utah Utes there, and Vandy. Can Vandy go in there and beat Ohio State? Probably not, right? But, they were in a hard-fought game against Auburn, who was playing for a lot, right? Their head coach just got fired, and anytime you have an interim, there's that added juice that can bring to a team. And Auburn basically gave them everything they could handle, but Vandy's able to force that game into overtime and ultimately win it. So I think Clark Lee, Diego Pavia, they deserve a lot of credit for what's going on offensively. You still have some questions there defensively. And, there's some teams here, we'll talk about Texas in a second, where it's like, well, they're not really near the top of the top 10 rankings. They're at the bottom, but they look like they're a national title threat. Vandy, really good team outside the top 10, but I don't view them as a national title threat by any stretch of the imagination. So those are my three teams just barely on the outside looking in. And at that number 10 spot, I got Texas, right? Who would have thought? Preseason number 1. Everybody said Arch Manning, good chance he comes in here and wins the Heisman. Obviously that not happening. And you dodged bullets, and that's probably a nice way to put it, to be honest with you. A couple of times on the road this year in Starkville, you pulled a rabbit out of the hat there, picking up a victory on the road, and then you should have lost to Kentucky at Kroger Field in Lexington. And you were able to pull that out of the hat there as well. And then all of a sudden you go, well, if you went out, you're in. Right, if you're the Texas Longhorns. And I'm really looking forward to that game against Georgia this Saturday. That's going to be an absolute banger. Arch is finally starting to settle in, play good football. His best game of the year against Vandy. He was able to go back home for that. That's huge in that Vandy game. So, Texas, the talent is there. I've got my questions on Sark. People want to sit here and put Sark on this pedestal and say he's up there with like Ryan Day and Kirby Smart and, Dan Lanning and Lane Kiffin. I don't think that's the case. I like Sark. I respect Sark, but he's not on that tier in my opinion. And he's kind of dodged a lot of flack this year to this point, in my opinion. I feel like, all the criticism and blame went to Arch, and then Sark was kind of, navigating his way around it. I think Sark deserves a lot of blame for how things have transpired this year. But you look at their record, they've only lost the 2 games. If they went out, they're in. They got a lot of talent. They got a lot of recruits. Defensively, they got a quarterback that's finally playing with some confidence and finally looks like that guy that we thought could potentially win the Heisman Trophy and potentially be the number 1 overall pick. So I'm ready to put Texas in. If they got blasted by Georgia, would that surprise me? No. But they definitely have an opportunity to win. That's going to be a great football game. I got Texas at 10. Didn't have them ranked last week. CFP, by the way, has them at number 10, and they were idle. Did not play last week because they get a bye going into that Georgia game. 9, I got Notre Dame. Last week I had them at 10. The CFP committee also has them at number 9, so I agree with them there. The Boston College game was weird. It's like Boston College stinks, right? And that game was way too close for way too long. I get you're on the road. But that was a game that Cincinnati or Notre Dame should have dominated. They didn't, so I was curious to see how they would respond against Navy, who Navy obviously doesn't have the athletes that a team like Notre Dame has, but Navy knows how to win football games. They know how to run the ball, and they've had a lot of success this year, and that wasn't even close, as Notre Dame absolutely boat raced them, beat them 49-10. What Notre Dame can do on the ground is really impressive with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Obviously, C.J. Carr there at that quarterback position. Marcus Freeman, he knows what he's doing, right? He knows how to galvanize a group, get them playing collectively together good football, especially down the stretch. So I anticipate them winning out and ultimately getting back in the college football playoff. And you got to give them a lot of credit because the start was not the best, as they dropped a couple of games there, obviously, to an A&M team who might be the second best team in the country. And, of course, Miami, who looked solid for a while there as well. But Notre Dame's done a nice job of bouncing back, got them at number 9. Ole Miss at 8. They get knocked down 2 spots. I had them at 6 the previous week. The CFPs got them right in the middle there at 7. They played the Citadel, so that doesn't mean anything. They won 49-0. So, I think Ole Miss was good. Kiffin, this is his best work of his career at Ole Miss. Maybe his best work of his career as a head coach. Probably, honestly, the case. Obviously, all the openings out there are calling for Lane Kiffin, right? How can we get Lane Kiffin to be our next head coach, whether it's LSU, whether it's Florida, whether it's Penn State, and you're even getting a little NFL buzz this time of year there as well with the Giants job coming open and obviously the relationship with Jackson Darts, and could the Miami Dolphin job open up there as well? Certainly a possibility. So Lane Kiffin's done a tremendous job. We'll see if he sticks around, but I bump him down 2 spots. Nothing against, Ole Miss. Again, they played the Citadel, but just some of these other teams really showed me a lot this past week. So I got Ole Miss at 8 and had them at 6 last week. Texas Tech at 7. We've been saying all year that they're the class of the Big 12. They proved that last week against BYU. That game was not close at all. Credit to BYU. They've had a good run to this point. Maybe they still, come into Clifton and beat UC. I still think they could, play in a big-time bowl game. But, they weren't on the same level as Texas Tech. That was obvious. Vegas tried to tell us that with the 10-point spread. And, 29-7, that game was not even remotely close. Joey McGuire's done a tremendous job, head coach at Texas Tech. And, they got guys on the defensive side of the ball, and when Baron Morton's healthy at that quarterback position, he's a really solid player for them as well. So I view Texas Tech as a threat. And if you sat here and said, Stone, you think Texas Tech can win the national title? I'm not predicting them to do it, but they absolutely have the roster to do it. They play good on defense. They get after the passer. Jacob Rodriguez, that linebacker, is one of the best players in the country. Baron Morton, when he's making good decisions, is great. McGuire, really good head coach, galvanizes them. And, I think Texas Tech very much a threat here. I've got them at 7. Last week I had them at 8. They get bumped up 1. And the college football playoff ranking system has them at number 6. Oregon, I have at number 6. Last week I had them at 7. CFP has them at 8. And we'll talk about Indiana in a second. But, that Iowa game, whenever there's a team that is, a better team than the team they're facing, and they barely win the game, there's either two ways you can approach that. You can either sit there and say, sometimes you got to be in really close games, and to show that you can come out on top in those close games, that means a lot, and I think higher of you as a team. Or the other side of that coin is, well, you were in a close game against a team that you are much better than. I actually think less of you at this point. I think higher of Oregon after their performance against Iowa. Look, they had to go in there and beat them at their own game, right? That went perfectly according to plan for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Crappy weather, run the ball, physical. You're on the road if you're Oregon, at home if you're Iowa. You couldn't have drawn up a better, game, really, if you're the Iowa Hawkeyes, and they still lost. And Oregon still won. They beat them at their own game. That drive from Dante Moore and the elements to get into field goal range, execute in that big of a moment, execute the special teams operation, make the kick, says a lot. And I think Oregon has different ways they can beat you. Obviously, you weren't going to throw the ball for 500 yards in weather like that. But if you want to get in a shootout with Oregon, I have my confidence that they can do that with Dante Moore at that quarterback position. So I'm really high on Dan Lanning, have been for a while. Thought when the initial college football playoff rankings came out, they were getting a little bit disrespected. I didn't quite understand that. The CFB still has them at 8. I'm higher on them. I got them at 6 here at this point. Last week I had them at 7, and they beat Iowa 18-16 on the road. Transferring into our top 5. I've had Georgia, it feels like, at 5 all year. Last week I had them at 5. The CFB has them at 5. I've got them at 5 again. I said on the show last week that Georgia's going to lose another game at some point. I still believe that. It might happen this week against Texas, to be completely honest with you. But they beat Mississippi State, a team that's given some teams some fits there. Jeff Lebby's coaching for his job. I think he's going to hold on to his job, obviously. They almost beat Texas, and they've hung in there against some good teams, but that game wasn't close. Georgia beat the crud out of them 41-21. From a roster perspective, you're seeing, obviously, with the NIL and transfer portal, you don't have these top-heavy rosters, really, anymore in college football, because the guys that were backups at Georgia are now starting at Mississippi State, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you can just load these rosters and all the backups are really, really good too. They're going to play elsewhere and getting paid a lot of money to do it. But I think Kirby's adjusted really nicely. I think he's the best coach in the country. And, offensively for them, that's why I still have him at 5. Defensively, you have questions, which is crazy to say about a Kirby Smart Georgia team. But Gunnar Stockton, credit to him, man. He's played really solid football, was good again in the game against Mississippi State. And believe it or not, if Georgia's going to get to the promised land, it's going to be on the shoulders of their offense. And we haven't said that really ever. I don't know if we've said that since like Aaron Murray and the Mark Richt years. So, pretty impressed with them. Have them at 5, but they're going to lose another game this year, right? They got some difficult games on their schedule. They're going to drop one, but they very much could still win the national title there as well. Talked about this on yesterday's show, what to do with Indiana. I've had them at 3 for a while now, and I'm dropping them down to 4. Last week I had them at 3. The college football playoff rankings have them at 2. They beat Penn State 27-24, and exactly what I was talking about there with Oregon. Sometimes you play a team that isn't as good as you and you barely win. How do you evaluate? Do you think higher of them or do you think lesser of them? I think lesser of Indiana in that game. Right, and we talked about the Gus Johnson call, give him the Heisman. What are you talking about? Against a team that's won a handful of games, lost to Northwestern and UCLA, doesn't have their quarterback, doesn't have their coach. I'm a Gus Johnson guy. That was crazy, and that was probably one of the worst calls of his career, to be honest with you. But yeah, I just don't view Indiana in the same light as I did before the Penn State game, right? I understand Penn State still has athletes. I understand they have guys on that team that are still going to get drafted in the NFL draft. I get that, but I look at A&M and I look at Alabama and I say I feel a little bit better about them here at this point. Again, Indiana could absolutely win the national title. Cignetti has done a tremendous job, but I've got some concerns with that performance. And, again, everyone wants to act like that was Fernando Mendoza's Heisman moment. Well, did you watch the first 3 quarters? Right? He didn't look like Julian Sain and even Ty Simpson, to be honest with you. So I've got Indiana at 4. A&M, I got him at 3. Last week I had him at 4. I bump him up here over Indiana after going to Missouri and winning. Again, that's not like, going into a super hostile environment and winning. I get it's still on the road in the SEC, but they got that construction going on behind one of their end zones, and it's not a crazy environment. But Missouri has a good team. Bo Prabula obviously did not play, so they had a true freshman quarterback there. But Missouri can run the ball. They have a solid defense there as well, and that game wasn't close. A&M said, yeah, no problem. And the thing I love about A&M is they can win in multiple different ways, and I feel the same way about Oregon, right? If you got to run the ball, fine. You want to get in an ugly defensive game, fine. You want to get in a shootout, fine. They can do all these things. Marcel Reed has been tremendous this year, throwing the football. We all knew what he could do with his legs last year and going into this year, but it's like, what can you do with his arm? If we need him to win with his arm, can he do that? He absolutely can. They've got some difficult games coming up on their schedule there as well. They're undefeated. They're in the SEC. They've knocked off some high-caliber opponents. I'm ready to jump them over Indiana here at this point. But you sit there and you wonder, right? And a lot of times when I'm thinking about this, I go, okay, if they played, what would the spread be? How would Vegas handle this situation? I honestly don't know. If Indiana played A&M at a neutral site, who would be favored? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was the Aggies. 2, I got the Tide. Alabama. I've been on this for a while. Again, you look at the score. If you didn't watch the game 29, that's not very impressive. LSU's in shambles. Well, you had questions about the Alabama defense, and what has Kane Walmack done over the last few weeks? They've got that completely cleaned up, right? Early in the year, you had all these teams going off for these explosive chunk yardage runs, right? And, that really hasn't happened much anymore. You got guys and DBs handling their run fits a lot better, eliminating the explosive plays. Jan Pierre is a star. I don't know if a lot of people saw that coming in the wake of Quay Rousseau breaking his foot, but he's been tremendous. And, if you're Alabama, you have some questions. They're running the football. People sit there and say, Alabama can't run the football. They have ran it at times this year. Obviously, LSU, they did not run the ball. They were one-dimensional in that game, and if you're one-dimensional and Ty Simpson isn't incredible, which he wasn't incredible these past couple of games, then, it doesn't look perfect. But I talked about this earlier in the week. Alabama has that ability where they can go get 50 yards at the snap of your fingers at will. You need 50 right now? Boom! They can go get 50 yards, and they're explosive. Still the best passing attack in the country. Kalen DeBoer. Where's the love for Kalen DeBoer? Everybody, let's fire Kalen DeBoer. Well, all he does is beat top 10 teams. All he does is win football games, and he's continuing that here this year. I've got Bama at 2, and you want to sit here and say, you're crazy. It should be Indiana or A&M. Well, remember what I just said about the whole spread thing from Vegas? You put Alabama and Indiana on a neutral field, Bama's going to be favored in that game. Like I sit here and say it's about a touchdown, but you bet Bama's going to be favored in that football game. The CFP has them at 4. I've got them at 2. Gauntlet continues. You got to play Oklahoma. You get a freebie with Eastern Illinois after that. Then the Iron Bowl, everything goes out the window. And then, at this point, it looks like A&M, but we'll see in the SEC title game there. Got the Tide at 2. 1, Ohio State. They've been 1 all year. They're going to continue to be 1. They beat Purdue 34-10. It was the first time, been a long time. They haven't covered the spread, so that was a little bit disappointing there for the Ohio State. But, they got UCLA at home this week. Not going to see much. And, I think it's interesting because you look at this season for Ohio State and you go, well, is this a disadvantage? Because if they find themselves in a playoff game where it's tight late, are they going to know how to react? Or is this an advantage where it's like they haven't even shown all the stuff they can do? I mean, you watch that game against Purdue. That was very close to the vest. They didn't just uncork things on you. And Ryan Day said, I think it was before the Purdue game, we're chasing efficiency on offense here at this point. And when we have to turn it up, we will. Which, if you're the rest of the country, that should make you shake in your boots a little bit because – yeah, that offense is real. That defense is real. They're playing with confidence, but not really going to get tested, and we'll see if Michigan can test them or beat them ultimately again. Was going to talk about Bengals rookies here. Paul Dehner Jr. Had a piece that went out this morning, but actually I'm going to stash that for tomorrow, and we'll kind of break down, Shamar, Demetrius Knight, Barrett Carter, your offensive linemen, Jalen Rivers, Dylan Fairchild, and Taj Brooks, who, by the way, I'm interested to see. It's frustrating because you see these running backs in the NFL, like Monungai for the Bears, who was taken in the 7th round, and he's really good. And it's like Taj, like, you haven't really asked him to do much, but what has he done? Not much, right? Well, we're going to see if that changes because obviously, a lot's been made of Joe Burrow coming back. You had to buy. But remember, P. Ryan's hurt. So you have a new backup running back. It's Taj Brooks. So for the first time, we're really going to see what he can do. Obviously, we've seen him on special teams, right, throughout the year to this point. But really going to find out what he can do from a running back perspective. I'm eager and anxious to see. Remember when Zach Moss went out last year, then it was basically like, 100% of the snaps go to Chase Brown. I think they'll be a little bit more hesitant to do that this time around. I don't think you're going to see a split like you did with P. Ryan and Brown, with Brown and Brooks. Probably going to be more 75-25, but I don't think they're just going to put Brown out there for 100% of the snaps again this year, especially with the record that they have right now. I don't think they will do that, but we'll see. We'll see. Taj Brooks, hopefully he can show something, and you can at least look at him and be like, okay, he can be our 2 to Chase Brown in years going forward. We'll see if he flashes anything in the game against Pittsburgh. Want to roll through some of our sports headlines here to close today's show. I think before we went on the air yesterday, the Dallas Mavericks fired Nico Harrison, GM of the Mavericks, the guy that traded Luka Doncic. Look, when you make a move like that and it doesn't, work perfectly, you're in deep trouble, and that's the situation Nico Harrison has found himself in. That whole thing is fascinating to me, right? Because you've heard reports about Harrison kind of just being a closed-off guy, right, and kind of operates on his own. And, there's something to be said for that. I'm sure that's a big reason why he was able to get the job in the first place, because I'm sure he works his butt off and, tries to think through everything he does very analytically and think before he acts. But, if you're in a spot like that, if I'm the GM of the Dallas Mavericks and I'm sitting there thinking about trading Luka Doncic, you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to talk to coworkers, fellow executives, not around other teams, but just people, executives within the organization. I'm going to talk to friends that don't even know basketball. I'm going to talk to family. I'm going to talk to everybody I can before I make a decision like that. So I know before I ultimately make the decision that I feel comfortable making it. And he would never come out here and say this, but you traded Luka Doncic. What in the world are you doing? I think he could have gotten fired right then, right there, right? And then he does that, and he gets just a gift, an absolute gift. They win the lottery, and he gets Cooper Flagg. What a gift. Job-saving gift for Nico Harrison. And then if you've watched Dallas at all this year, they've won 3 games, and they're unwatchable. They look horrible, and no clue what Klay Thompson's doing. They don't have a point guard, right? I mean, come on. Nico went out there. I get Kyrie's hurt, but, you went out there and you said, we're just not going to have a point guard this year, and we'll see how that goes. Not going to be good without a point guard. Or you're going to try to put Cooper Flagg at point guard where he's not a point guard. Can he do it? Sure, but has he played point guard? He's 18 years old. Come on. What are you doing? So, you never love to see guys get fired, but the writing was on the wall for Nico Harrison. In every home game, you got the crowd chanting, "Fire Nico." Everybody in Dallas turned against him immediately and have been against him. He is the number one threat, public enemy number one in Dallas is Nico Harrison. So when you make a move like that and it doesn't, and you don't win a bunch of games, right, and it looks like there's no hope after that Doncic trade, it's hard to go on. It's hard to go on, so he gets fired. Louisville beat Kentucky last night, and I was watching that game, and very early on, I'm like, yep, Louisville can win the national title. And Paul Fritchner kind of echoed similar comments when he was talking with Reed a little bit earlier on off the bench. They can shoot, they're tough, they're physical. Pat Kelsey, we all like him here in the city of Cincinnati, but Paul also brought up a good point. Got to win a tournament game here at some point. And Louisville, I get it's early, but they have to obviously make the tournament, and they got to win a tournament game. They got to go on a little bit of run here because they've got a really good roster. They've got a lot of talent, and it kind of feels like Louisville basketball is back, to be honest with you. And we haven't said that in quite some time, really, since the Bettino days. And, we talk about programs like in the college football, like it just is better when Notre Dame and USC are good. I feel kind of that way about college basketball. Like when Louisville's good, that's a good thing. And I know if you're a Kentucky fan, obviously you hate to hear that. But Kentucky going to be fine, by the way. I'm not worried about Kentucky. In fact, they deserve credit for playing games like this. You look at teams that are going to challenge themselves and play tough games early. I love that, right? Because that gets more people. Like you're competing with football season right now. So if you're just going to sit here and play these cruddy schools as big-time teams, who wants to watch that? Not many people, right? But then you look at Nate Oates over at Alabama. Already played St. John's, in the Garden. Then he's got Purdue on Thursday. And the list just kind of goes on and on for them. So I would like to see more of that in college basketball, right? You're competing with football season. Get more eyes on your team, on your product early here in November. And I think ultimately that could help with the growth at the end of the season when a lot of people already are tapped into college basketball. So Louisville beats Kentucky last night. Also, Illinois beat Virginia Tech by 4. It was a 3.5-point spread. So Illinois covers by a half point in that game. I think both those teams are good there as well. Again, credit to Texas Tech for playing that game. Texas Tech's a good team. They're a tournament team. They're going to go on a run. Absolutely. So I give them a lot of credit for playing in that game. Jameis Winston, he's now the backup, so he's going to start with Dart being out. What have you been waiting on, right? It's just, I don't know, man. The New York Giants and the decisions they make, I don't get it. I don't get it. Like, I get Russell Wilson at one point was on a tear, and there was one point in Russell Wilson's career where you say, yes, he's a Hall of Famer. Now, let me be very clear. He ain't a Hall of Famer. He ain't close to being a Hall of Famer. But there was a point in Seattle where you'd been crazy to say he wasn't, right? And he has fallen. I haven't seen an athlete like this just completely fall off a cliff. There's been a few, but, I mean, it's just crazy because he can't play. He flat out can't play. And I don't know if it has to do with him getting hit a lot in Seattle. Obviously, he made his money escaping the pocket, kind of the, extend the play type of stuff, which he was great at. But, yeah, it's just you can't be a serious team and roll Russell Wilson out there. I mean, he coming in for Dart last week, terrible. Absolutely terrible. So, Jameis should have been the guy if you weren't going to go with Dart the whole time. But, it's cost you some games there as well. I think, Russell Wilson, his time here in this league is probably done, to be honest with you. We'll see if he has any interest in sticking around and being a backup, but no team would have any interest in him being a potential bridge quarterback. But it's good getting to watch Jameis Winston, assuming Dart's going to be out. He's going to provide a couple of great sound bites. He's going to provide some entertainment. He's going to throw a couple of bad picks, right? But ultimately, he's good television, and especially in New York, too, so that'll be kind of funny. Travis Hunter, season-ending surgery. He's done. You had the new GM in place in Jacksonville who, I don't know how old he is, but he looks like he's my age. He made a big swing. He basically said, you know what, here I am. I'm making a big-time move, and he traded up for Travis Hunter, lost a lot in the process. And very early on, it was, okay, Travis Hunter is obviously a great athlete, but in the NFL, is he going to directly lead to more wins? I don't think so. Right? I don't think so. He's going to have a good NFL career. He's going to have a long NFL career if he can stay healthy. But does he look like that player that you should trade up for and lose a bunch of compensation in the process and be a game changer for you? Probably not, in my opinion. Now he's going for the year. We'll see what Jacksonville does from a receiver standpoint. They were aggressive, trying to add at the deadline, and they had that game won against Davis Mills in Houston. They scored a lot of points offensively, and that's just a typical Jaguar loss. I got belief in Liam Cohen. I've been high on Lawrence forever. I guess I'll continue to be a believer in him, but it doesn't look great, right? Certainly getting overpaid. I think we all know that. But, yeah, I just – Travis Hunter, he's out for the year, and you're rooting for him. Hopefully he can figure it out, but I don't think you're really on a spot where that looks like a good move, trading up for him in the draft. Obviously talked with Mark Sheldon, Stephen Vogt, very deserving, wins manager of the year again in the AL, and Pat Murphy gets it in the NL for the Milwaukee Brewers. So hats off to those two guys. Tito, runner-up, rightfully so. Thought he did a tremendous job keeping the band together and keeping them galvanized. And, ultimately leading the Reds to the postseason. So that'll do it for this edition of the show here on a Wednesday. 3 guests here on Chatterbox. 2 hours of quality content here at the channel. Paul Fritchner, certainly appreciate him. Rebound Rundown was on the call last night on ESPN Plus for the Butler game. He's got a few more games coming up. Looking forward to that. I think he's got a few with Xavier. I know he's got a couple on CBS Sports Network, too, there as well. So certainly very excited for Paul. Does a tremendous job. Great having him on the show. We'll have him on our show at some point here in the near future there as well. Jay Morrison, tremendous on the beat for the Bengals. Growler podcast with Dana. It's great. I listen to it every Monday morning, so they do a tremendous job. Big shout out to him. And, of course, our guy, Mark Sheldon, covering the Reds for MLB.com. Great interview there. We covered a lot. That'll be up later today. Big shout out to Mark Sheldon making some time, helping us out here during the offseason, providing some good Reds coverage here at the channel. Obviously we got Nick Kirby, Trace Fowler, Craig Sandlin, and and others. Mike Hart, of course, do a tremendous job with our red stuff. And, we got them, obviously, at Chatterbox. And if we can get, Mark Sheldon on the show as well, that's the best Reds coverage you can find anywhere. So we certainly appreciate all those guys. And, again, that video or that interview with Mark will be out later today. Appreciate everyone, as always, for tuning in. Again, be on the lookout for YouTube videos and podcasts, social media clips, all that good stuff throughout the duration of the day and this week as well. And we will talk to you tomorrow right here live on Chatterbox Sports. But until then, take care, everybody.